it's a really good example of like, if you really do just put your head down and work harder than everybody, like there's a need for that out there. Like somebody's gonna see that value, and they're gonna offer you a gig.
The west and east side swap the north. Asphalt from the heavens.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast celebrates the many cool people doing awesome things in and around this community. We're all about creativity and hustle, so that's what you can expect. Today's conversation was a really special one for me. I got the chance to sit down with Jeff Ament, bassist for Pearl Jam and a Montana native. Born in Havre, grew up in Big Sandy, and I've just been a Pearl Jam fan for years, but really didn't understand the depth of Jeff's commitment to his hometown until I moved here and learned that he was sort of the favored son of this community and has a home in Missoula and is just a big supporter of a lot of things in and around town, things you wouldn't maybe know about if you weren't paying close attention. I was interested to talk to Jeff for a variety of reasons. Obviously, I've been a huge fan of his work, and I can't deny that. But what interested me is, how does he stay true to his roots? How does he stay grounded as a world-famous rock and roll star who seems pretty dedicated to coming back and participating in a community like Missoula and in a state like Montana? So I was interested in that. Second thing I wanted to explore with Jeff was, how does a band like Pearl Jam stay fresh, stay at the top of their game for 25 years? What's it take to keep a relationship like that going? And we got into kind of the creative process that they go through and sort of the editorial dynamics within the band, and that was a really cool part of the discussion. Finally, I wanted to ask Jeff, he's all about work ethic and hustle. This guy is a grinder, and it comes through in the conversation, and just if you know anything about him. But what was interesting to me was, once you sort of achieve some success, he and his bandmates have been tremendously generous through the Vitology Foundation and a lot of their other sort of outreach areas. So I wanted to get into that and understand the thought process he goes through to help create opportunity for others to maybe come out of small towns or to achieve from their communities or whatever it is. So wanted to get into that. So it was a super fun conversation. And if you hadn't noticed, we got some new sound. Jeff was very generous to donate to us his new single, Safe in the Car, off the upcoming album, Heaven Hell. So before we get into the conversation, a little bit more Safe in the Car.
Western promises. Bodies fall from the rusted temples. Dust blocks the sun's rays. Hallelujah.
So I'm here today with Jeff Ament. Jeff, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Good to be here.
Jeff, been just a huge fan of your work for a long time. As we said before, one of my first formative experiences here as faculty member at University of Montana was going to the Pearl Jam concert fall of 12 and seeing your connections with Senator John Tester and all that. So I'd like to get into that and some other things. But first of all, how does a guy from Havre and Big Sandy, Montana, kind of keep grounded as a rock and roll star?
I think being from north central Montana is, I think by staying connected to where I came from, I think that's probably helped ground me more than anything. When things were crazy in 92, 93, that was when I started coming back to Missoula. I had a couple friends that were still here from when I went to college here. This guy Eric Cushman and this guy Tim Bierman. And it just got to the point to where every time in between a tour leg or any break that we had, I was just coming back here. And it was hard to be in Seattle at that time because there was no anonymity I couldn't go to the grocery store anymore without like 10 people asking me what's going on, and it just sort of wore me out. Like, being a small town kid and sort of having a different sort of energy about that sort of thing. It took me a really long time to sort of accept, the spirit of, people coming up to you and being excited and saying things like, "You changed my life," or those things. Like, it took me a lot of years to figure that out. But coming back here was huge, and just keeping sane at that time, and having a real perspective, because the guys here didn't care about, that I was playing big shows or selling records, so.
Right on. Keeps you grounded.
Yeah.
So grew up in Big Sandy, athletics, art, huge part of your life. But one thing that stood out to me and kind of learning more about your background is you were working hard right from the start.
Yeah. I mean, my dad grew up in West Central Minnesota on a dairy farm, and had to quit school in 8th grade because his brothers were in the Korean War, and he sort of had he grew up with that, so he passed that along to us. Sure. And I'm the oldest kid out of 5, so I was a little bit of the experiment in terms of that. But if my dad was doing anything, he always had a little 80-acre farm in the edge of town where he always had cows and pigs and chickens, and grew some sort of rye or some crazy, grass that we hand cut or,
Sure.
bale or whatever.
No shortage of work to do every day.
No, it was constant. And we worked on Saturdays and Sundays. And I think part of the reason I got into sports was so I could have Saturdays off, so I didn't have to
a break.
So I didn't have to help my dad, on the farm. So, it's kind of the only way that I knew how to make things happen, was just to put my head down and work.
And do it. So high school, basketball, football, big part of your life.
Yeah.
Was art starting to emerge as a part of your life in high school too?
Yeah. Well, my mom was always playing piano and drawing when I was growing up, and so that was always just a big part of it was just kind of daily activity. And I always got, it was sort of how I made my friends laugh. Like, I would draw some crazy picture, in 3rd grade or 4th grade, and pass it around the class, and everybody would laugh. And it was sort of like, I don't know, it was sort of how I won friends over. Mm-hmm. And so, by the time high school rolled around, there weren't any art classes in Big Sandy. And I think just the way that my personality is, that probably had more to do with the fact that I was an art major coming to Missoula. I was like, well, there's no art here. Well, that's what I'm going to do. If somebody's telling me that I can't do that, then that's what I'm going to do.
Sure. And were any music at that point in high school? I
played piano growing up for 7 or 8 years. And then by the time I was in high school and doing sports, I was in, I think I was in band through 7th or 8th grade. And then I was in choir all through high school.
Okay.
Mainly just to get out of study hall or whatever
other stuff
we were trying to do. Yeah.
So you come to University of Montana in mid 80s, 81. Were you a first generation college student at that point? Maybe had your parents gone to college?
My mom went to college for about 6 months, and then married my dad and started having kids. But she was in the nursing program at Northern Montana.
Okay.
But pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a large proportion of our student body here, and something that I noticed right away teaching here. So many of our students it's their first point of contact in their family to a university, and that's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my dad in particular really wanted that for all of us.
Yeah.
Was really disappointed when I had to quit after 2 years. I ran out. I mean, I basically saved money all through high school to pay for my first year. Then my second year was $4,000 in student loans, which is probably the equivalent of $20,000 now or something. Least. And I just couldn't see taking out any more loans. I was like, how am I going to pay back this $4,000?
Right.
Because my first few years in the workforce in Seattle, I was making $6,500 a year or something like that.
So did you move to Seattle more to like get a job and make ends meet, or did you move to Seattle for music?
I moved to Seattle mostly, if I'm being honest with myself, mostly because of the music. I had a friend, Randy Peprock, who was in a band here, who moved to Seattle, and we'd gone out to visit him. We went out to a Clash and Who show, and there was another band called X, a really great LA punk band that was playing that same weekend. And when I kind of saw what he had going on, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like, he was working in a cool restaurant. I ended up, when I moved out there, the job that I thought I had worked out didn't work out, and I ended up getting a job where Randy worked, and just super hipster coffee shop called the Raison d'Etre. And it was everybody who worked there was like a artist or a actor or musician or all of the above. And being a kid from Montana, like it completely opened my whole world up. Like there was, all these people that were into jazz, and Mark, who was the cook, took me to see Ornette Coleman, and took me to see King Sunny Ade, and took me to see King Crimson, and sort of like, I mean, I was a punk rock kid at the time, but sort of like really opened up the whole world, and I sort of realized that music was all sort of punk rock too. Like it was all outsider music, and
you're kind of drinking it all in through a straw, and it's kind of intimidated by it. Okay.
I mean, I was 20 at the time, and I was hanging out with a lot of 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. I mean, Stone, who I'm still, in Pearl Jam with, I met him. He was probably 16. And those kids had all, they had seen a lot more in their life than I had seen in my life. And so it was an odd thing.
So like they're younger, but they've more been in the scene because they've been living in Seattle. And
yeah.
Okay.
And it's sort of like, they were more comfortable around girls, and they were more comfortable, they had sort of like experimented with drugs and all that stuff more than I had. So I sort of felt a little bit, I felt like the kid.
Sure.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Going through that at that time, I was actually sort of mad at my parents for a few years, because I thought, wow, like they made me live in this podunk town, and I didn't learn anything about like real living and real life and city life. And then, by the time I was in my 30s, I was like, thank God that I grew up in Big Sandy. Like, somebody with I was a pretty intense, I probably would have been diagnosed as all sorts of things and put on meds if I, had grown up in this day and age. But, my parents, I was a handful to my parents. And I think growing up there, I could sort of like, they could sort of manage me in a little town like that, like everybody's sort of watching out, and, you get in trouble from the principal or.
Right. And a piece of that too, like you're a little bit older. I would assume these other kids, maybe they have some help at home from their folks, but you're on your own.
Yeah.
Grinding to kind of make the rent, put food on the table. I mean, that seems like a big theme of your early days.
Yeah, I think, after I'd been there a couple of years, I developed a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about that. And that chip probably got the biggest when, the first, band that put records out that I was in back there, Green River. When we split up, the scene sort of split at that point, and half the scene went with Mark and Steve to Mudhoney, and then half the scene went with Stone and I to Mother Love Bone. And some Mudhoney sort of broke out before we did, and there were just some things that were said at that time about like, Stone and Jeff just want to be rock stars, blah, blah, blah. Right. And so that, I always felt like that sort of put me in this zone where like things were easy for me or things were given to me. And that really bummed me out.
Yeah, because that's like the opposite of true. Yeah.
And, things have come out since then where, Mark has talked about it since then. Like, well, Jeff was doing it, he was doing all of it. He was the most punk rock out of all of us or whatever. And, but yeah, I still have a little bit of that chip in my shoulder, and I think I acknowledge it and go like, it's okay to use that to energize, a project that you're working on or whatever. But I gladly would have taken money from my parents to go to college and finish my art degree and whatever, but I think things would have been a lot different for me because I sort of got by on my work ethic alone. Like I wasn't just the bass player in the band, but I was also the guy that was making the posters and the T-shirts and talking to the promoters and setting up tours, and it sort of made me valuable in a group, sometimes with better musicians and better songwriters, and it's just it's a really good example of, like, if you really do just put your head down and work harder than everybody, like there's a need for that out there. Like somebody's gonna see that value, and they're gonna offer you a gig.
I mean, and that's what. So I listened to you did an interview with Mike Powell a few months back, and one of the themes that stood out there is, like, you were doing a lot of the hustle behind the scenes, like you said, doing the artwork, doing the booking the venues, all that stuff. And one thing that was interesting is, as these bands you've been in kind of emerged in the pre-Pearl Jam days, like going out and going after the best musicians at whatever seat it is, the drum kit, whatever. And that seemed like maybe having that ability to make things happen allowed you to go out and go after those types of partners.
Yeah. And I think, my partner in a lot of these bands has been Stone, and Stone's always been fearless in that regard in terms of going and asking, Greg Gilmore to be the drummer in Mother Love Bone, who was clearly the best drummer in our scene, and I've been so lucky, pretty much my whole career. Like, even here in Missoula, I played in a band with this guy Sergio Avina, who was he was a jazz drummer, and he was really great. He was always, he was the best musician in our band. And pretty much every band that I've been in, the drummer has been the best or one of the two best musicians. And being a bass player who has to be step with the drummer, man, I've been so lucky, because I've sort of, just through being in the same room with these guys over 30 years, I've sort of become a pretty solid bass player, just because I've played with Matt Cameron, who's clearly one of the great rock drummers of all time, and Dave Rabraziz, and Greg Gilmore, and Alex, and Sergio, like all these guys, that are, you make a list of the 10 best drummers in Seattle history, and I played with 4 of them, so
amazing.
Lucky.
Yeah. And so as this is starting to emerge, as kind of you're becoming Pearl Jam through all those sort of transitions through various arrangements, you're not only just the bass player, but you're writing the music, writing a lot of lyric. Is that different than many bands? I don't know the typical sort of authorship structure and how creativity works in a band. Well,
I mean, when I started, I was in a punk rock band and here in town called Deranged Addiction, and the first singer in that band was this guy John Donahue, and he was a California kid, and we started off playing covers, and we were playing covers for like 3 or 4 months, and he's like, "Well, you guys know that this is nowhere." We were like, "What? What are you talking about?" And he's like, "We got to write songs."
Okay.
And I remember the rehearsal. We were downtown off of Main Street in the basement of this place called Urban Renewal. And I remember just going like, how do you write a song? Like, wow.
Yeah, I have no
idea, because I just been sort of copying what, the bands that I loved and the bass players that I loved. I was just playing along with records. And so I remember John said, well, just pick out the 2 or 3 songs that you like the most and borrow.
This episode of A New Angle was brought to you by Momentum Athletic Training. If you are in need of getting back into shape, staying fit, getting stronger, all of the above, preparing for the human race, go visit Kiefer and Rhea down at Momentum and get yourself in gear. They are the best. MomentumAT.com.
Within a couple of months, I remember Bruce and I had both written songs, and we sort of inserted them into the group of covers that we were playing. And then it was sort of on. Then it was sort of this thing like, I'm going to do something in the style of Flipper. I'm going to do something in the style of Black Flag, or I'm going to try to write something as amazing as the Dead Kennedys, who were like, if you really get into the Dead Kennedys, they were very progressive and very complicated punk rock band. So then it became like, this, then it became my job, Right. I was like, okay, how am I going to learn how to be a songwriter? And then over the course of the next, few bands, I would write more in some situations, less in some situations. And then probably 15, 20 years ago, I was like, okay, I need to learn how to write songs, start to finish songs. And that's really been probably the most job-like aspect of what I do. Where every day you just try to go in and, try to work on something, whether it's new or something that already exists. And you try to get to a point where you have a finished group of songs. And either those songs, get placed in front of the Pearl Jam guys, or they end up in a side project, or end up on a solo record or whatever. But it's sort of the most gratifying it's the most gratifying aspect of what I do, because now you don't really know where that stuff comes from.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sitting down going like, I'm going to write a love song, or I'm going to write a song about social injustice, or you just sit down and start playing, and vowel sounds come out, and so there's sort of this magical process, and it can also be a very once you get into the words or the vibe of the song, you realize that it's some unfinished, deep welled thing that you haven't dealt with in your life. And so it's I feel so lucky to be in this position where I can spend a part of my day every day like just working on those sorts of things, these art projects that have real meaning and actually help me grow as a human being.
And so how do you, like, you mentioned just a few minutes ago, like some of the products of that process go to side projects, some go, you have a solo album that just came out.
Yeah, it's coming out in a couple
and
weeks,
and some go to the Pearl Jam group. Like how do you kind of decide which goes where and why?
I'm not sure. Sometimes with the solo projects, like it starts to feel like you'll have this group of 3 or 4 songs that start to feel like they belong together.
Okay.
And so you'll set those aside for that. And then as songs start to attach themselves to that group, then that becomes that. In terms of what songs end up on Pearl Jam records, I don't understand that process any better now than I did 27 years ago, because sometimes you think like, oh my God, this is like cut and dry, like killer Pearl Jam song.
Okay.
Like you can just hear Ed singing it and Mike playing over it and Stone and Matt, you can just hear it. And those songs often when you get zilch response.
Huh.
And sometimes it'll be the weird little thing at the end of the tape that it's just like, me playing drums and like a little bit, the most not together thing. They'll be like, oh man, that thing's cool. Let's work on that. This last few years, there's been more sort of pairing off with each other. And sometimes if you can find one other person in the band that can champion your idea and maybe even contribute to that idea, so there's more sort of co-writing going on, I think that gives the song a better chance of being considered.
That's so interesting, this like editorial process within your own group.
It's crazy. By the time we get down to the 10, 11, 12 songs in on a record, there's probably 100, 150 ideas that have been floating around that we've all heard that. And sometimes it's, really Ed has to be really excited about it because he has to go out there and 90% of the time he's writing the lyrics too. So he has to go out and he has to be the face of that thing.
Yeah.
And he has to believe in the song and he has to believe in the music. And, it's hard to, sometimes the thing that I believe the most in isn't necessarily the thing that he most believes in.
Sure.
But that's sort of what makes it a band and makes it interesting, is that everybody sort of, you can come in with a real definite idea of how you want the song to be. And once the band gets a hold of it, it's not yours anymore. It's the band,
and having the sort of courage to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
I mean, it's fun, especially that after all this time, it's still like a great mystery. It's just this big mystery.
I mean, you guys obviously have to deeply respect each other's kind of artistic contributions enough to keep it going.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's
well, and I think everybody's pretty driven, on the side of Pearl Jam, that I think even just witnessing that, just how, Matt will be out doing the Seth Meyers show, and Mike's got, Flight to Mars, and he's got, everybody's sort of got different things going on. Ed will write a great song for a movie, and so we sort of witness each other, working. Everybody's working to kind of be better at their craft, and I don't think it's easy for any of us still. I think now we have enough skills that we can move through something better than we did 25 years ago, but it's still work. And I think that's sort of kept the band alive. That's kept us interested creatively in each other, and then that mystery of not knowing what the next record's going to be, because like I said, some bands will like have a press conference and say like, our next record's called this and it's going to be about this, and and they haven't written a note, and we're the opposite. We're waiting for it to come out of the ether, and
right.
Like, what's it going to give us? And if you were a religious person, you'd say you're waiting for the hand of God to touch you and let you create this stuff. And that's sort of what it's like. It's sort of, and that's the beauty of it. That's it is the thing that sort of makes you believe in some sort of a God. That just the magic of like, where does that stuff come from? And I'm so fascinated by people's processes, and in particular, artists' process, like what drives them and where does it come from, and what do they do to get themselves in the environment to receive that and create. I just think it's like I think it's the best thing in life that life has to offer, like that. Where does that, what drives people to run 100 miles or
sure, and the courage to kind of go into something with no idea what's going to come out.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's the excitement of anything creative.
Yeah.
It's just not knowing what the end point is.
Yeah. And not knowing if like, wow, maybe this is going to be it.
Yeah.
Maybe, and not even that the well's dried up, but maybe like the understanding that you have collectively. I always worry that at some point, is something going to get out of balance, and is that going to be gone? Is just somebody at some point, does somebody not respect you, or do you not respect them? And then the thing is broken. And, when people ask me why, or how do you guys stay together? I'm like, I have no idea. I mean, why do you end up with like
why do marriages stay together?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or you look at a couple when you first meet them and you go like, that's the all-time couple ever in the world. And 3 years later, they're in the most heinous divorce or whatever. And so,
although I think it goes back to a point you've made a couple times, in that all you guys are working on it.
Yeah.
And relationships the same way. If you're not working on it, it can suffer and die or get really sick.
Yeah.
So I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to make sure we get to a couple things that I know are important to you and are important to kind of this community. And a big part of that is your philanthropic commitments to Missoula and Montana, Missoula Food Bank. I think was it the 2012 show, you guys made a huge donation to the Poverello Center and the new location. Mm-hmm. But Montana Pool Service and your commitment to helping build skate parks throughout the state, throughout the Pacific Northwest. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, when the band first started doing some philanthropic stuff, we did some shows in Seattle, probably mid-90s, and we decided that we were going to give all the money away from the Seattle shows to organizations that people in the band supported.
That's, just to interject, that's a huge commitment.
Yeah.
Financially, but also, I mean, as a band, like it's not just the five of you, it's the whole structure that goes
Yeah.
into the shows, the production, all of that.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty huge commitment.
But there was sort of some excitement, and like, I mean, and up to that point, anytime that you're a money-making organization, there's people hitting you up for,
Of course,
and especially nonprofits, and so many people out there doing like really great work for nothing, and going, existing paycheck to paycheck. But we sort of opened our doors a little bit to that, and with Nicole Vandenberg, who runs the Vitality Foundation for us, she sort of vets, everything that comes into us, and then it got to be fun. And then I remember those first shows. Like, I think I gave my money to the Seattle Center Skate Park, and then I gave money to Bailey Boucher, which was hospice for AIDS patients, who I'd worked at that restaurant Raison d'Être, and had lost a couple of people that I worked with to AIDS.
Yeah.
And so I felt a connection to those things, and that was sort of the beginning of it. And coming out here, if you go to a Christmas party or you're hanging out at the coffee shop or whatever, you just end up developing these relationships with people that do such great work. And I ended up being friends with people that worked at Blue Mountain Clinic, which is also one of the first, one of the first Missoula shows that we did. We gave some money to them when they were rebuilding their clinic after it got bombed in early 90s. And then that turns into the food bank and Poverello Center and the ZAC, and there's just so many organizations in town that are doing great work. And it's part of the reason that I came to, when first time I came to Missoula when I was like a junior in high school, there was like that sort of hippie blue dot element to Missoula, that there was something in me when I was 16 that I thought, wow, oh, those are kind of my people right there. Like, there was a feeling about that.
Felt at home here.
And coupling that with like just the way that my parents were growing up, like, my dad and mom both volunteered, all over town. My dad was a non-paid mayor for 20 years, and like
unpaid mayor for 20 years.
Yeah,
wow.
Worked for the city council, and was on the church council, and like helped build the church. Service. And like helped older people in town like do remodels in their houses, or help them take out their garbage, or he was always sort of giving to the community in that way. And so that was just sort of something I witnessed as a kid, and I feel so lucky to be still in this band, and we're in some ways probably more successful than we've ever been in terms of touring. And so it's sort of like, I decided 10 years ago, like, I'm going to, as long as this thing keeps going, I'm just going to keep putting a pretty solid percentage of whatever I make into this Montana Pool Service Foundation thing. And it'll be mostly focused on trying to build skate parks around the state, or in South Dakota, or places where I have friends that are doing great work. And then maybe that'll roll over into other things that help young people. That's sort of the if I'm lucky enough to be here 20, 30 years from now, maybe it'll be, building, I don't know, a swimming pool in a small town, or
opportunities for young people.
Yeah. And opportunities for young people to be active and to be outside and to be getting in touch with that part of themselves. Get them. I mean, not to say there's anything wrong with a computer screen or whatever, but just to get that part of their life a little bit more balanced out.
That was a giant part of your upbringing.
Yeah. I mean, there's there was no choice in the matter, but I was outside all the time, and it's still where I want to be. It's still, that's the great thing about being here in Missoula, is it's, the existence here is sort of based on everything that this place has to offer. Like, you can get on your bike and get on any number of amazing trails on any of the hillsides that surround the entire town. amazing skiing and snowboarding and, running. I'm not a fisherman or a hunter, but if you like to do that, that's, it's pretty optimum.
And so a lot of my understanding is a lot of the work you guys have done with pool service has been, has helped nearby Indian reservations. And so is there a reason why that emerged in your thinking about this?
Well, initially that wasn't I wasn't going into it thinking like I'm going to go help out Native people necessarily. We were driving around the state a lot, like, 10, 15 years ago. I would just see, like I would run into a kid and say like, I'd run into a kid in St. Ignatius skating and he'd be like, oh yeah, we came down from Browning. And you're like, oh, you guys skate in Browning? Oh yeah, we have a little indoor thing. We have a couple ramps, at the bingo hall or whatever. Mm-hmm. So you put that away in the back of your head and you go like, well, if we get a chance at some point down the road, maybe we'll try to build something up there. And that's sort of how we're operating right now. Like we built a skate park in Big Sandy 7-8 years ago. I noticed there was some Native kids that were skating. I'm like, hey, where are you guys from? They're like, oh, we're from Rocky Boy. It's like, oh, we need to build a park in Rocky Boy. Mm-hmm. There's kids that skate up there. And so this year we're building a park in Box Elder, which is just down the road from Rocky Boy.
Yeah.
But it's mostly just paying attention to where it seems like you want to build these parks somewhere where there's a group of kids that are going to sort of take ownership of the park and maybe take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of, it's pretty easy if you build it in the wrong place that nobody uses it and then people are just like riding their motorcycles in it and just destroying the place. So,
what is it? I mean, I know you're passionate about your own skateboarding, but what is it you think about skateboarding and skate parks that is a particularly good vehicle for this type of philanthropy?
Well, it makes me feel probably more alive than just about anything other than maybe playing music. Like makes me feel really in touch with life force, like that thing that, the blood coursing through your veins and your heart pumping and it's the fear and it's all of the like all of the things that go on with like failing and hitting the concrete really hard. I think combining that with like, it's cool now. Like it's actually like whatever baseball was in the 50s and the 60s, skateboarding is right now.
Yeah.
Like it's like, it's sort of what kids are interested in. And, I feel like I've been lucky enough to get to know some of these skate park builders who've ended up, Grindline and Dreamland and now Evergreen. I mean, these are 3 of the top 6 or 7 companies in the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I have a relationship with these guys and they're from the Northwest, and that they're willing to come out to the middle of nowhere in Montana and to build a world-class facility in these small towns. I feel like it's a way to sort of bring the best that the world has to offer to, Box Elder or to Lewistown or these small towns. And it sort of lets those kids know that they're connected to the rest of the world because they're being reminded every day by their phones that they're not as good as the big city.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it sort of feels like this is a way to sort of go like, actually, you know what? You have it better than the big city kids because big city kid has maybe a park that's twice as big as yours, but they're sharing it with 1 million people.
Yeah.
You're sharing this park that's half as big with 3,000 people, or whatever.
Yeah. And kind of the message that you can do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just a huge bonus for me because I get to get in there and help design and I get to hang out with kids. Like we don't have kids. And so I get to hang out with these kids and find out what's going on in the world. And I stay connected to them. I send, stuff to some of these kids at Christmas time.
Oh, that's awesome.
And try to just be the cool uncle, and, you kind of hope that, I know I didn't listen to my parents very much from 12 to 18. And sometimes I was listening more to the older kid or my uncle or, than I was my parents. And you just feel like maybe you can sort of guide them in a way that maybe their parents are having a hard time guiding them.
Sure. Maybe you can get some message in that they're just not acceptable to other.
Like you can skateboard and go to college.
Right.
If you go to college, there's a great skate park in Missoula, or there's a, great skate park in Bozeman, or, whatever. But that part's been really fun. And to see some of these kids, like they could barely even stand on the skateboard. And now they're just like killing it.
They're ripping.
They got bag of tricks and got their own style because they're isolated, and which is sort of what skateboarding was in the beginning to me. Like you'd go to different towns and you'd really see these different styles, and you see that still can exist if you build a park in an isolated enough area. So
that's kind of a cool way to think about it. I hadn't thought about that. Like you create these parks, world-class facilities in isolated areas, and these guys are just sort of, they're not playing by any rules. They're making it up.
Yeah, they're just using it. They're using it the way that it seems to work for them. And if one kid gets really good and develops their own style, then everybody starts to follow that style. Then it gets really weird, because then you see this group of 10 kids who are riding in the same way that isn't like any pro. Yeah. So
that's got to have a lot of parallels to how your style of music developed. I mean, you guys were pioneers with a lot of that kind of emerging Seattle sound.
And I think Seattle, in the early days was pretty isolated. Like it wasn't, a lot of times bands would make it to San Francisco and they wouldn't quite make it up to the Northwest, So
we're getting a little bit of that now. I mean, now that Missoula is starting to emerge as an additional tour date for a lot of big acts.
So awesome. Yeah. I mean, everything that Nick's done with, Nick and like the Knitting Factory guys, they're doing great stuff at, and it's the perfect spot. It's like, it's right between Minneapolis and Seattle and Portland. And, a lot of bands are, go to Calgary and Edmonton. So we're just right below that. So Missoula's in a sweet spot music wise right now.
Yeah. It's thriving.
Yeah.
So we're, this podcast comes out of a business school. So I would sort of be neglecting my responsibility as a business school professor if I didn't ask you about sort of Pearl Jam's taking on Ticketmaster back in the 90s. And it was right after Vitology came out, if that's right, and just decided you guys are not going to sell tickets through Ticketmaster.
Well, it was just, it was the first time that we were sort of feeling like we had some power, and we recognized that there seemed to be a really wide gap between, we were trying to keep our ticket prices low at that time. We were like, we're going to charge $15 for a ticket, and then you charge $15 for a ticket, and then they'd stick a $7 service charge on top of it. We're like, I remember. That sucks, and it hasn't gotten any better.
No.
But the problem is that from the fan standpoint, they just saw the $22 on the ticket. And the one thing that did change when we went through that whole process was that they had to print service charges on the tickets. So any ticketing agency anywhere in the U.S., like it says $15, and then it says $7 service charge. And so at least the fan knows that, a third of the money is actually just going to this service, but we've sort of done that all. We still run up against stuff like that where you see something that seems a little bit out of whack.
Well, like all these ticket service, all these these reselling services and bots are buying up tickets so fast.
Yeah, StubHub and all that stuff is just the worst thing ever. And it's weird to me that you see like the biggest ads, like NCAA games and all that stuff are like these StubHub ads, and it's just like, it's ridiculous, And I, every year I try to go to the NCAA tournament somewhere. I try to go to a regional or something and see some games, and I usually end up just buying the tickets on my own, and you'll spend like $400 for like a 20th row seat for 2 games, and unless you're one of the schools getting into those places, you really don't have any access to the. So I don't know what's going on with all that. I know that as a band, we're constantly retweaking our ticketing to sort of try to eliminate, all that scalping and stuff, and it's just almost impossible. Like especially when if you're selling 20,000 seats at a show, or 45,
80,000, 100,000. Yeah.
But you do what you can, and you try to make sure that we really try to take care of our fan club. We try to get 10 to 20% of the tickets that go directly to our fans and our fan club.
Mm-hmm. And you guys have been at the cutting edge of kind of that fan club process and how to try to innovate around these different influences for a long time. Yeah,
trying to eliminate the middleman a little bit. Try to go directly to the the source, and that anytime you can do that, it feels better. It feels better if you can. If you can go right to the store that makes the honey and buy the honey from them, as opposed to, going to, Whole Foods, which is a fine store, but, somebody's making a big chunk in the middle of that.
Right.
And the farmer's probably getting,
getting the worst deal of all. Yeah. That's the sad part. So, Jeff, this has been super fun for me. I mean, obviously, super fan of yours and Pearl Jam and all that. I'm just intrigued. One last question is, you go from like playing to 100,000 people in South America a few weeks back to back in Montana. Like, how does that sort of transition from one phase of your life to the other? Like, how does that work out?
It's getting easier to do that.
Okay.
It used to be when I would come off of those tours and just all that energy, I would have a really hard time being at home. And it's not just all the energy. It's also like when you're on the road, you're staying in hotels, and so somebody's like washing your clothes, and somebody's like
the whole thing,
making the bed and cleaning your bathroom and doing all that stuff. And there was a period of a few years, like when I first met my wife, I was like, okay, I'm going to come home for a day, and then I'm going to go somewhere else for 3 days or 4 days. And I'm just going to like learn how to pick up after myself and cook a meal and do a few things. And then I'll come back when I have those skills back. And
that's probably really good for your marriage.
Yeah, I think it was critical, because you'd come home and you'd be like, all over each other. Like, I've been here doing this, and you're like, I'm out making the money. You have these stupid conversations. But it's easier now. Now, like usually when I'm on the road, it's a grass is greener thing oftentimes too. Like if I'm here for too long, you're like, oh man, I wish we had a tour coming up, or wish we had some studio time booked. But like, halfway through the South American run, you're going like, oh, at the end of this, I get to go to Montana. Like,
right. You got that to look forward to.
Maybe get a trip into Lost Trail, or whatever whatever you're hoping to do. So, I usually I can't wait to get out here and do all the stuff that I've been thinking about doing. And especially with summer coming around the corner, you're like, it's you don't want to be anywhere else.
No.
Even though the option is like Wrigley Field or Fenway or something, which is incredible, but like I want to be in Montana as much as I actually want to be at Wrigley, really.
Awesome. Well, that's a great way to end it, Jeff. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks for your time, and It's been a pleasure. Good luck.
Awesome. Take care.
Okay, that was super fun. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking to Jeff. What an amazing guy. And just to sort of experience how much of a down-to-earth, real person he is was such a treat. So a couple things there. Keep your eye out for the new album, Heaven Hell, coming out on May 10th. And you can find that wherever you find music. But I think Jeff would like you to go buy a vinyl copy, because he made plenty of those, and they're available at your local record store, if you can find one of those. Next, if you're interested in learning more about the philanthropic efforts that Jeff and his Pearl Jam bandmates are on, please check out their website, pearljam.com, and go to the link to the Vitology Foundation. Lots of great information there. Coming up next week, we have Eric Sprunk, Chief Operating Officer of Nike, and a very proud graduate of the University of Montana and an accounting major here at the College of Business. Eric is a phenomenal guy, a huge supporter of many, many things we do here at the University of Montana. And he is set to be our commencement speaker. And I was fortunate enough to get on his calendar to grab some of his thoughts. So super excited to talk to Eric and get that interview out to you as soon as we can. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. Remember that A New Angle was brought to you by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. They're our first sponsor, and we can't thank them enough. CED is one of the largest electrical wholesale supply companies in the country with nearly 600 locations nationwide. CED is a privately owned business-to-business company that distributes just about every piece of equipment you need to keep your lights on, your energy flowing, and your lifestyle comfortable. CED is also an important employer in our community, and they have a keen interest in University of Montana graduates. To explore career opportunities, check out www.cedcareers.com. Before we go, I'd like to thank a few folks for making this project happen. Elizabeth Willey, the communications director here at the College of Business, and then our fabulous team of interns, Michelle DeFluke, Max Gibson, and Savannah Sletton. And a special thanks to Jeff Ament for letting us use his awesome music. Finally, a thanks to my producer, Stefan Borson.
Glaciers recede to your doorstep.